Okay, this is another video. This has to do with the nostalgia of the 70s and known restaurants that used to be in Atlanta. This video is primarily about those restaurants that no longer exist in Atlanta or anywhere else. My earliest memory of any kind of a restaurant was a place called Shakey's Pizza. They still have them in Japan. They do have them, I think, in California, but they don't have any in the southeastern United States. There's none in New York. As far as I know, there's none anywhere. I was 4 or 5 years old, and my mother used to work at South Fulton Hospital, which is off of Cleveland Avenue. And of course, y'all, if you're from Atlanta, you're going to say, "Oh man, Cleveland's a bad place." And it wasn't when I was growing up. It was a safe area of town. But they had a Shakey's Pizza. And this is what I remember. When you went to Shakey's, the first thing as a kid you saw was they had this big glass window at the entrance. And what's big about that? Well, you got to see them make the pizza. So when you went in there, the first thing that you saw was the fact they're sitting there tossing the dough up in the air and they're making the pizza up and everything. And nowadays they don't even show you anything. You walk in, it's like, okay, where's your money? Here, take it. You don't even know what they did, how they made the pizza or anything else. It's like, you know, I'm waiting for you to pay for this order. Well, at Shakey's, it was a very home environment. You know, you came in there, you had other kids and their parents there. And Shakey's, if I'm not mistaken, they played old-fashioned silent films in the restaurant. And they had an organ playing too. And there's only one other place I've ever found that did that, and in the 80s they used to really be big. It was called J. Burns Pizza and Pipes. It had an exceptionally large Wurlitzer organ mounted inside glass panes, and when they played that organ, all of the panes of glass would vibrate. That's how loud it was. And they did the same exact thing. They would have home movies or old silent films playing, like Charlie Chaplin, all the rest of them, the Phantom of the Opera, and they had an organist playing it while you ate your pizza. And I always remember that about Shakey's. Shakey's Pizza was like the place you went if you were a kid, because it was like nostalgia time. Kids wanted to go to places like that because they didn't have really anywhere else to go. Let's see, in the 70s there was also a restaurant that I loved, and I hated it when they went out of business. It was called Valley's. You spell it V-A-L-L-E''S. Valley's had the greatest of every kind of food. They had seafood, they had steak, they had hamburger, they had incredible desserts. But for me, what stood out was something called New England style scrode. Scrode is like flounder. And every time my parents said, where are we going to go eat tonight? I said, Valley's. I gotta go to Valley's again. And Valley's used to be up there off of I-75, South 75, before you got to Jonesboro. It was right there on the right-hand side of the highway. And Valley's had a very unique type of color scheme of their building. It was red and white striped, so it resembled something like an old-fashioned ice cream parlor place. And you knew when you got there this was Valley's, because that's how they decorated their building. And that scrode was like nothing I've never found it again. And I guess the only way I'll ever have it again would be to go to New York or someplace up in Maine or somewhere where they probably still make it, but they don't make it here in southeast United States anymore. Now for a video mention of a particular restaurant that is no longer in business. I have found a place that still sells the same food, but there used to be a Mexican restaurant chain that was called El Chico's Restaurants. All it sold, all it had was Mexican food. It was the best I had ever tasted, especially the enchiladas. And they always served corn chips or tortilla chips as the appetizer. And then, of course, I hated hot sauce, so I didn't have that. But that was the first thing that they always gave you when you got to the restaurant. A big basket of just tortilla chips, and you could dip it in this hot sauce or whatever. But the enchiladas were like, I mean, man, I have found a place that still sells it. I'm not going to advertise their name, but I'm going to tell you that it's a chain of Mexican restaurants outside of Sonora, which is in Coweta County. And if you ever can go there, I think it's called the Guadalupe Mexican Restaurant. If you've ever been there before, it is exactly, I mean, down to the texture, to the taste, the same food, exactly the same food as what El Chico's used to sell. A lot of people are going to say a restaurant is not a restaurant unless it's a Godfather's Pizza. Well, in southeastern United States, I don't ever remember seeing a Godfather's Pizza. I have seen ads for them, but they never had one here. All we've ever had here in this part of the country has been Pizza Hut. That's it, Pizza Hut. If you wanted a pizza, that's the only thing you had. Papa John's didn't exist. Only Shakey's. Shakey's Pizza and Pizza Hut were the only two chains. Then later on, around the latter part of the 70s, we got a chain of pizza restaurants. It was called Mr. Gatey's. Mr. Gatey's Pizza was up there off of, it wasn't on Burdette Road. I'm trying to think of what the name of it. Old National Highway. Old National Highway was the place in College Park. You went there because you had a Dunkin' Donuts. You had Mr. Gatey's Pizza. You had Sizzler, which nobody even remembers Sizzler anymore. We had a Ponderosa Steakhouse. We had a Bonanza Steakhouse. All of these places are gone. They don't exist anymore. But we had Red Lobster. Even then, Red Lobster was like, they had it decorated inside exactly like a fisherman's wharf. Had nets mounted on the walls. You went in there, you felt like you were really on the dockyard of the shipping at the boats. They don't do that anymore, but I mean, when you came in as a kid, you thought, hey, wow, we're really inside a shipping yard, or we're at a dockyard or something. Something similar I remember recently was they have something like that on Dark Shadows. Whenever people went to the Blue Whale restaurant or bar, they had it decorated like that too. Really, there is no other place that compares to Red Lobster as far as how they decorated the inside of the place. But trying to think of where else. The only other restaurant chain that stood out in my mind as a child, whenever we went, we would always go sometimes to the local movie theater, because it's the only way you could see a film. You couldn't see it on your iPhone. There was no such thing. There was no such thing as Netflix. There was no such thing as you either watched it on TV because they aired it, or you had to see it at the movie theater. And there was a local ice cream chain of ice cream shops at the plaza where they had the movie theater, and it's where it used to be. There used to be a Service Merchandise there in that plaza, but it was called Dipper Dan Ice Cream. That's what it was called, Dipper Dan. And going back to the 1976 bicentennial celebration, Dipper Dan came out with a special kind of ice cream. It was red, white, and blue. And it was not a popsicle. I'm talking, it was actually soft serve ice cream, and it was in the colors red, white, and blue. And it actually had in the ice cream a blue field with stars. And I don't know how they made it, but anyway, that used to be the greatest flavor any kid could buy, was this bicentennial flavor. Everybody remembers, I'm sure, or has seen a bicentennial quarter, which was the government issued this Patriot on the quarter. And I collected probably $30 worth of them, and about 1977, when Star Wars came out, they came out with this collector watch. It was the very first digital type of calculator watch that, or not calculator watch, I'm sorry, it was the first digital kind of watch. Well, I spent all $20 of those bicentennials and I got one. And I've still got it. It's broken the handle off, but I've still got it, and you can see it on some of the other videos I've already posted on my channel. But the only other restaurant chain that stands out to me is Crystal Restaurants. Crystal used to have 3 mascots. There was a hippo, a walrus, and a monkey. And they would always be there at the restaurants when they did grand openings, or if they remodeled the place, they'd show up in those costumes. And Crystal doesn't even promote those anymore. But I have posted also those things on some of my other videos on nostalgia, and y'all might get a kick out of watching it. But that's pretty much all that I can remember of restaurants about Atlanta. When they first opened the Peachtree Tower in downtown Atlanta, the Sundial Restaurant had opened around 1978, and it was that first month after they had started. My father took my sister, my mother, and me up there. Scariest experience I've ever had, because I hated heights. I still hate heights, but I did go up there a couple of years ago, and it's the only restaurant in Atlanta, other than probably now the Polaris Lounge, that had a rotating restaurant. It moved all the way around the skyline, and you have to think, this is the very first month that the place was open. It was immaculate. And for the kids, they would always put pennies on the window sill, so that when they got around to the other side, they'd know that they had come around and there was their penny. Well, kids were taking the pennies. Other kids would grab the pennies off the rotating glass paneling. Wherever the kid would drop it, he'd take the penny off, and then the kid never knew of whether he got around to the other side again, because all the other kids were stealing their pennies. Well, that's kind of a nostalgic thing. But I'm glad my father took us at night, because if I'd had to see it during the day, going up all 70 floors or whatever it is, I was like, I'd never made it. I was terrified anyway, but you know, it was like, that was the biggest thing in the 70s that you did in Atlanta, Georgia, was you went to the Sundial Restaurant. And there was the Polaris Lounge. There's one restaurant I don't intend to really mention, but I have to, because it's the only place that exists in Atlanta that has the same architecture as the old Atlanta Municipal Airport. It's a restaurant that's right there inside the Georgia Farmers Market in Fairburn, and it's called the it was called Parker Brothers, or it was called the Davis Brothers is what it was called. They were the original owners. I don't know what it's called now, because I contacted them and tried to ask them if I could come up there one day and videotape the inside, and they never even cared enough to answer. But that's the only other notable restaurant in Atlanta that still exists today, because those roof panels that go in an arch is exactly the same setup as what was at Atlanta Municipal Airport. That's the only thing that stood out to me about that restaurant. It had nothing to do with the food, it was just the architecture of the building. But in a nutshell, that's pretty much the only restaurants that, to me, bear any kind of real mention, because there's never been anyone or any place like those since, and probably never will be again. You know, because Atlanta's not the same community it used to be. I mean, everything has basically either been destroyed, it's been torn down. Pilgrims was another place. It went out of business. There were 2 of their restaurants. One of the restaurants burned down. My parents used to take us out there because they had the best T-bone steaks, and it bears mentioning in this video today, but those are the only places I can think of. And I just want to say to everybody, thanks for watching this video and for letting me share my experiences of those restaurants that we used to have in Atlanta. Thanks.